Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tax Sale Insiders. I'm your host. I'm Brian Seidensticker, CEO of Tax Sale Resources. I was lucky enough to nail down a couple guys today. We've got Randy Saunders back and new, face, Matt Abey. They're both with Nelson Mullins, which is a nationwide law firm, actually practices law in 30 states, has over 900 attorneys. They're one of the few, I'll say, larger groups of attorneys that actually practice law in the tax sale space, do it regularly. And both Randy, who focuses in West Virginia and Kentucky, among helping in other states, and Matt have their own expertise. But rather than me dive into that, I guess folks have heard from Randy before, but Matt, I guess. Well, let me get to that. I guess welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Thanks for joining us. And I know several of our listeners have heard from you before, Randy. We talked about very specific, how sales in West Virginia work and how they work in Kentucky. But Matt, you're new, so give us a little background on how you got in the industry, what states you're focusing on, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. So I'm Matt Abey. I'm a partner with Nelson Mullins. I practice out of our Columbia, South Carolina office and practice a lot with Randy and our tax lien team. We cover obviously a number of different states, but I guess my bread and butter would be Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And we kind of focus on the entire industry. I mean, there's no one thing that we do more than others, but we kind of think of ourselves as being able to take you from A to Z, from doing your due diligence, acquisition, all the way through clearing title and flipping it if that's what your exit strategy is. So we do those in a number of different states, but then I focus mostly on the Southeast.
Okay. Well, thanks for the kind of background. I guess what I want to do here is really a three-part series, guys, if it works for you. And today kind of focus on, hey, I'm a new fund that I want to scale in this industry, or I've identified this industry as something I want to pursue. And today I want to focus on, I'll say, high level things that maybe I should keep in mind as I start assessing and developing my model in a state or various states, and specific to the states you guys have expertise in. And then we'll follow it up with maybe some specific examples in part two, and then part three, we'll dive into how do you really avoid those situations, which is really the meat of the fun stuff of all this. So let's start with the top level, high level, general stuff. I guess Matt, let's start with you and the Southeast part of the U.S. that you focus in South Carolina and Alabama, et cetera. Of what are some of the things as a new fund looking to enter that space in any sort of scale that I need to keep in mind?
Yeah, so I guess maybe the top three things that I would say is first, knowing your state and knowing the nuances. Each state's going to be different. They might follow the same traditional path as another state, but have this one little step that if you overlook, you might end up just getting a worthless piece of paper. That's the first thing. Second thing is due diligence. It's not the sexiest part, but putting in your time up front can help make sure that you've got something that's worthwhile on the back end, and that your fund is in the black. And then third, reaching out to an attorney early in the process is very helpful. I know that a lot of times you worry about, you only want to worry about retaining an attorney when something has gone off the rails. But a lot of attorneys will give you some guidance for free up on the front end, 30 minutes or an hour consultation without charging you anything. But then go into detail a little bit later, give you an opinion letter or something about the state that you're trying to get into. And armed with that knowledge, then you can avoid some of the pitfalls or sticky situations that we often see. So the first point that I was talking about, the state-specific examples, we've been in the industry for a while, so we've seen your different models across the country, whether it's a bid up state where you're bidding up the price towards market value, and you've got an overage that's then claimed or credited to the buyer, or I'm sorry, to the homeowner or a bank holding a mortgage. And then there's also other options where you're bidding down the interest. Some states that have got multiple ones. So all of them follow a similar trajectory when you're talking about the style of bidding and whatnot. But then when it comes to how long you're going to be in the property before it matures, that's something that you need to keep in mind. How long you've got to clear title so that you can flip it, or do you even need to clear title? Are there other options that are out there that might be more efficient or quicker, depending on your exit strategy? So doing a dive into the states and kind of learning the nuances of those states can really help you out. The second thing, as I mentioned, due diligence, going through and making sure that you're looking at the state of the title. And maybe that's not cost effective to do for every single property you're bidding on, but maybe you've got a threshold if you're bidding over a certain amount, and that's going to be a big chunk of what you're paying out at a particular tax sale. Maybe it's worth paying the extra $300 to get a title search on that, or even a lesser amount if you're going to do just a short current owner search. But that'll help you identify some liens and other problems, which you'll know from doing your research on the state whether those liens and other clouds on the title will be cleared out by the tax sale, assuming the county or the auditor, whoever it is, the county official, does everything correct. And so then third, getting an attorney involved. I know that sounds a little self-promoting, right? I mean, I get that. But we have seen situations where if a client had just reached out to us a little bit earlier in the process, we could have told them, well, you can avoid this landmine by doing this, or we can give you this advice, and that's the best way to get an argument for later so that you can get some clear title. Like I said, a lot of attorneys will have that kind of initial consultation with you without charge because they're wanting to grow that relationship, wanting to make sure that you know kind of some of the main pitfalls that you want to try to avoid. And then as it gets more detailed and it gets more in the weeds, then maybe it's worth retaining that attorney, paying them on an hourly basis or even a flat fee to get some good advice so that you make sure that you're not upside down in your fund early in the process.
I think I always look at due diligence and attorney fees, et cetera, as insurance, right? It's easy to say, oh, that's kind of expensive, but it only takes a couple times of really getting bit, right, to reverse the investment from a lot of good decisions. And so I always look at this industry as it's more risk mitigation than it is trying to chase the best return, right? The more you can limit your downs, the higher that up is going to be. And if you focus your area in that, limiting your losses, then you'll succeed in the end. I was
going to say, Brian, I think all of that too is really interconnected. When you look at it from, choosing your state and what your objectives are, to going into how I'm going to use the information I have through due diligence, through when do I need to get an attorney involved. And one of my favorite kind of jokes to use, when sometimes you'll have somebody come to you and there's just a situation that's gone from bad to worse, and they're like, hey, you got to help me with this, and literally you look at it and you're like, unless you have a time machine, there's really not a lot we can do at this point. We can try to unwind, we can try to go, but I think a lot of times people think, well, I can wait to get to the attorney until it's really bad, and you can, and we can fix it, but it's also going to cost a lot more, and so the way to preserve your return on investment and also avoid these problems, versus yes, getting you out of a jam, but also eat away your entire investment. And I think, to Matt's point, a lot of times when we are approached by somebody who's new to the industry, for instance, it'd be somebody that's fitting in West Virginia, and they'll be like, hey, I was talking to somebody, or I saw this, and I want to invest in tax liens. And you ask them, where, and they're like, well, I'm going to do it in West Virginia because I live here. Okay, but why? What do you want to do? So it's like Usain Bolt said one time, he's like, you see me run in the Olympics for 9 seconds, right? And everybody cheers that I won the gold medal. I train every day for 4 years, and I've trained my entire life to run for 9 seconds, and that's why he's successful. So, the back end return on investment is built off making sure that when you go in, you choose the right state, you choose the right statutory scheme, you choose, the right counsel to help advise you, and you spend your time doing the due diligence on the state, on the mechanisms that are in place, on the purchases that you're going to make. And if you do all that up front and you really understand, the area that you're working in, then it's going to make it, and again, you're never going to avoid all issues, but it's going to make it a lot more smooth sailing than to simply jump in and say, I'm going to do West Virginia because I live there. I'm going to show up at the tax sale and buy a bunch of property because it's cheap. And then I'm going to ride this thing until it goes into the ground, and then I'll call an attorney. Like, that's the recipe for disaster. But the line of thinking, you're right, is a lot of times the line of thinking is, I don't need an attorney yet. I'm not in trouble. What we like to say is, give us a call, let us keep you out of trouble.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's perfect segue into, I want to dive a little bit into, I guess, say the due diligence pillar of the 3 items you mentioned, Matt, because that due diligence will vary, right, from state to state, as you guys know. And so maybe we'll start with you, Matt, and the states that you're, expertise in. What are some of those items that are unique to each of those states that maybe aren't as big of an item in other states?
Yeah, so let's take South Carolina, for example. As a part of your due diligence, you need to know what county you're going to buy in and what that county's procedure is for noticing. So you can look at the statute all day in South Carolina and say, oh, well, the county's supposed to send this notice before the tax sale. They're supposed to publish and then send a notice before the end of the 1-year redemption period. But if you dug in to find out, does that county also send notice to lien holders? Or does it just send notice to the owner of record in a bank holding a mortgage? That's going to differ from county to county, and that's going to have some huge implications for whether or not you can clear a lien holder's interest from the property when you go to the quiet title state of things or step of the process. So that's one thing that you need to know as a part of your due diligence. Another thing that you need to know is really what kind of quality deed are you going to get? I mean, what's the county's record, kind of track record for giving proper notice and following the statute? Each county is going to be a little bit different. Some of the more populous areas are going to have more resources to devote towards sending notice. And you're not going to be able to find that by just looking on the website, and they don't have like a little ticker up there of how many times have we been sued for not following the statute. But doing a little bit of asking around and knowing how helpful the tax office is. Another example is, how quick are they going to get you a deed after all this is done? So of the 46 counties in South Carolina, we've got a handful that they take almost a year to get you a deed after the redemption period ends. And you really need to budget that in when you're generating your models and knowing how long that cash is going to be tied up in this property before you have something that you can actually act on, before you have that tax deed in hand. So those are a couple of things just from a high level as far as knowing where you're buying. And then once you figure out and you've got kind of a target list of properties, going by and checking out the properties themselves, trying to see, are you in a gated community? Do you need to start thinking about things like HOA liens or assessments that might come into play? Going by and checking out the property to see if the grass is higher than your head and you're going to get hit with city liens for cutting the grass because it's a nuisance. Or going by and finding out here in South Carolina, you've got a neighbor that's got a shooting range on their property, and there's no way that you're going to be able to flip that to some family to build a home on, right? So those kind of things. And then looking at the state of the title. And again, I realize that the title is the last thing people are really interested in, just because from a cost perspective, if you're going to pay $200 to $300 for a title search, and you're going to bid on hundreds of properties, you can't do that on every single property, not just from the expense, but the time that would be invested in it, and the fact that tax sale list is going to change so often. I mean, new properties are going to be added, they're going to be taken off, and by the time you do the tax sale, half the properties you ran title on might not even be eligible for bid. So maybe setting a threshold internally and figuring out, if we're going to bid over X dollars on this property, or at least we're ready to bid that much, let's pull a title search. Let's do that, 30 days before the tax sale, so that we know, are there liens out there that are going to stick on this property, Or you might also know whether if it's a current mortgage on it, you might know that the bank's going to redeem once they get actual notice of this tax sale. So doing things like that as a part of your due diligence can help you buy something that's worthwhile.
That's and that was specific to South Carolina. Well, some of that isn't necessarily specific to South Carolina. It's everywhere, right? Which pieces of that do you think would be very specific to South Carolina?
As far as doing the due diligence?
Yeah, like I guess I'm familiar with like HOA liens definitely being a problem, and in South Carolina, that sort of thing. Is there any other pieces that are specific to South Carolina versus other states?
Yeah, so the HOA liens are certainly an issue. I mean, we've got a ton of golf communities down here on the coast, and you buy in, you end up having to pay a $20,000 initiation fee. So that's something you're going to see specific. You're also going to see that certain counties are not going to give notice to lien holders. And so somebody that holds a judgment or one of the departments of revenue that holds a lien on the property, they may survive the tax sale. So you end up buying a property that's already underwater, and you've essentially lost your investment. So those are a couple that are specific to South Carolina. One thing that we see that some due diligence can help you on in both South Carolina and Alabama specifically are mobile homes and manufactured homes, and knowing from looking at the tax records, looking at the chain title, is there a mobile home that's tied down to the property, and have the statutory process for retiring the certificate of title, has that been followed? Because if not, maybe you're buying a piece of property that has a mobile home on it, but you didn't buy the mobile home. And so then you're fighting with somebody who's living in the mobile home, who, if they didn't have money to be able to pay the taxes on the real property, they may not have the money to be able to remove that mobile home from the real property. So then you're going to expend additional money in lawsuits, ejectment actions, and then in physically removing the mobile home from the property. So as a part of your due diligence, you can check those tax records and some of the title records to be able to see if you've got a certificate retiring that title to the mobile home.
Okay.
And I'll say, Matt, that's a problem in West Virginia and Kentucky too. And especially so in West Virginia, you want to look to see the test is whether or not the mobile home has been affixed to the property. So again, are you getting a structure in the real property, or are you just getting the real property? In Kentucky, it can turn a little bit because you've got 10 years plus one to act on your lien there. So a lot of times when you're picking up an older portfolio, one of the things you'd want to look through in the due diligence process there is to look through and say, do you have a portfolio that has a lot of mobile homes, and has there already been a determination made that these mobile homes are not affixed to the property, and therefore that's why no action has been taken, these haven't been moved, because they understand that the cost, because again, Kentucky is a judicial state, so you got to go through the court process. And so those issues, again, can take a considerable amount of time and money, and they just make the overall return on investment for those liens very narrow, if any. So I think that's something, and it's probably, I would say probably a common issue in a lot of the southeastern states. But we see that a lot, where you've got a large portfolio, and the more aged the liens are, the more you see issues like that, where you need to stop and ask yourself, and again, if you haven't looked through these a lot, or you're just going to pick up the portfolio, you might not stop to think, why does it matter if those are mobile homes as opposed to stick and mortar homes, and why would those have a different valuation than just a traditional home on a tax lien?
And you kind of switched to Kentucky because the mobile homes out, and it's probably across multiple states, not
right.
just those two. But since we're on the topic of Kentucky, Randy, can you maybe help me or us? I'm the investor starting to look at expanding my fund or starting a new fund, right? And I'm wanting to scale this. What are some of the things I need to keep in mind, in Kentucky versus maybe some other states that I've looked at?
Yeah, and I feel like, and again, they're the ones I'm most familiar with, but I feel like there's a nice dichotomy between West Virginia and Kentucky. And it speaks to, what are your overall goals? So if you're gonna invest in West Virginia, I think it's more attractive to somebody who wants to acquire property just because the process is that much easier to acquire property. A little bit more difficult to make money, and not impossible, but through the redemption process. And I mean, if you ultimately want to try to acquire properties, either resell them or start a rental, West Virginia is a great market to do that. In Kentucky, I think it's the exact opposite. Kentucky is set up, the statutory scheme in Kentucky is such that, you have to work with the taxpayer, you have to set up a servicing plan. There's all kinds of, and so again, before you jump in and decide, hey, I'm going to go into Kentucky and I'm going to buy a bunch of tax liens. Even if you're the original, acquisition, or you are purchasing a portfolio, you need to understand, again, it's due diligence, not in the properties, not only in the properties themselves, but also due diligence in the mandates of what the state laws require. And so, you look at Kentucky and you say, if I'm going to purchase these and I'm going to work through, and I have an obligation to act as a servicer on these before I, take certain actions, am I equipped to do that? Or if I'm looking through the portfolio, has it been done? Because ultimately what I need to know is I'm going to have to go into a court of law in Kentucky, and I'm going to have to show that all these things were done and done correctly. If not, I'm going to end up with worthless paper. And so it is, and I think too, again, you look at the difficulty in actually acquiring actual property interests in Kentucky versus making money, because even the scheme at the end of it, the property will be sold by the county at a foreclosure sale, and you can show up and bid on it if you want, but ultimately you're going to get your share out of the proceeds to pay you off, and that's what you're going to take. And so your end game, after acquiring a lien, servicing it, going through the judicial process, selling the property, is here's some money. The odds of actually getting the property make it very difficult. So then that leads to the question, if you haven't thought all the way through that process, what counties are you buying in, and what's the market there like for? So if this goes to foreclosure, who's going to show up and buy it? I mean, if you're in a county that's got 25,000 people, it's pretty stagnant. I mean, it's the people that live there are the only ones that are going to be buying it. What's the likelihood that this is going to be able to go and sell and cover what you've got in it, plus anything else, any other judgments or any other liens that are out there?
Right.
The other issue I think you have to look at is Kentucky has 120 counties. That means you have 120 different county judicial systems, and some of those systems have multiple. I mean, you could like Jefferson County. I don't even know how many judges they have. 17 judges maybe sit there. In Eastern Kentucky, you could be down in Pike County, and I think they have 3 judges on their circuit. But have you talked to attorney to say, what is the atmosphere like for tax lien purchasers? Because if you go to a county and you're like, man, I'm going to buy in this county, there's no competition. There's only 2 other bidders that showed up. Why? Why do you think that might be? Because there's no market to buy them, and the judges are not, supportive of this. And so, people have learned that this is not a good place to purchase. And so you want to look, again, I understand you want to limit competition that you have, but you also want to make sure that you've got a market, and you've got a judicial system that's supportive of the process. All we want to be is fair and impartial all the way through, and we understand it. And I think especially when you get in the Southeast, I know Kentucky and West Virginia, we talked about this before, Brian, but property is just kind of inherently a family. There's a big connection to the land.
Right.
And so, I think some courts, you have people that come in, this has been family land for, 8,000 years going back or whatever to when God made the dirt, and so it's going to influence in some aspects, and so you need to know how is the court going to handle this? Are they just straight up and down, look, this is what it is? Or are you in a court that when it has discretion is going to err on the side of saying, hey, we're going to give them another chance? Then you go and you flip over to West Virginia and you say, okay, what am I looking for, here? What's my ultimate goal? Again, if you just were real successful in Kentucky, and you think, hey, yeah, let's go next door. We'll start doing it in West Virginia too. It makes perfect sense. They're right there. They're located close together. Just because it's geographically close to where you're doing business or it's where you're from, that's a horrible reason to decide that's where you're going to get in.
Right.
Because those two systems and outcomes couldn't be more different. In West Virginia, you go to the sheriff's tax lien sale, you purchase a tax lien. 18 months goes by. Now you have notices and stuff that you have to send out, but 18 months goes by. You walk down to the county and you get issued a tax deed. So the due process end is on the back end in West Virginia. If within 3 years, if somebody wants to come forward and challenge that tax deed, to say they didn't get notice or they think something was done improper, they can. So just because so you got two portfolios and you got somebody in Kentucky saying, hey, I'm going to sell you the stack of, whatever. And in West Virginia, like, I'm going to sell you the stack of tax deeds. And it's to Matt's point earlier. What does that even mean? What is the difference between a tax deed in West Virginia versus a tax deed in other states? And when was the due process period on that? Is at this point, is that an insurable tax deed that I can then resell? Or is it like West Virginia where, I've got a 3-year period where there's going to be some clout on this because somebody can come forward and challenge this. So even if I try to take it to market, I can still sell it, but I'm also going to have to sell it not at a premium, but at a discount because there is that risk factor that's inherent in that. But that being said, you can acquire a significant amount of property through that process in West Virginia, but you also then have to have a plan of how you're going to use it. The other thing I would say is when you look through, especially purchasing a portfolio versus acquiring, from the sheriff, I think your due diligence is a little bit different, but in both, you have to understand the state scheme that you're in and know what is required to be done. And if you don't or you're not comfortable enough, that's a good place to hire an attorney. You don't have to pay the attorney to look through the whole portfolio and spend 100 hours doing this. But having a call with an attorney for an hour to say, what's required in West Virginia? If I'm looking at this portfolio and I need to have each of these, I need to have what pieces of paper should I have? What notices are required? And so if I end up going to court, if I am going to take this and I'm going to take these tax deeds, and I do have to go to court because somebody challenges it, what do I need to show that I'm, what stack of paper do I need to show that judge that everything was done correctly? And that's easy for us to do. And in West Virginia, I mean, it's strict statutory compliance. Either you did or you didn't. And, we've regardless of the emotional aspect of it, my experience has been, for the most part, that if your documents are in line, then you're gonna prevail. If they're not, you're going to lose. And so, looking through that, portfolio purchase, that when Matt and I talk about the due diligence, it's more than just reviewing the documents. It's understanding the state you're in. It's understanding the state law. It's understanding what's required. And making sure, again, before you make that jump, that you understand exactly and that you've allocated that risk. So you can buy something that may and maybe half of the portfolio doesn't have what you need, half of it does, but at least know that. And then negotiate that in your purchase price. A lot of people we talk to when they're trying to acquire portfolios and stuff. But just because there are issues doesn't mean that it can't still be valuable. But if you don't, it's just like a new home, or if you're going to buy, a house and negotiate with the realtor and stuff, you want somebody to come in and do that inspection so that there's a few shingles missing and the lower fireplace doesn't work. So you can, you still want to buy the home and you'll take the chance on it, but I'm not going to pay as much because there are these issues there. So there has to be some reduction in price in that portfolio.
Right.
Yeah.
Knowing what you're.
And Brian, can I piggyback just on one thing that Randy said there is the distinction between buying a portfolio that somebody else has actually gone to the county and put their paddle up and bid on versus buying actually from the county. Those are distinct things that you need to be thinking about. If you're going to buy at the county office, who's going to go and actually sit there and bid, or do you need to pay somebody to go bid for you? And have you given them clear instructions on what to bid? Versus you're buying that portfolio. One, are you getting the right type of document from them so that you would be able to get the tax sale certificate or the tax deed assigned to you? Or two, are you getting the backup documentation that you might need in order to talk, get the title clear later on down the process? And then three, do you have some kind of ongoing obligation that you've received from this seller, where if you need additional documents or you need additional support, an affidavit or something to support a quiet title action, can you get that from them? Because we've seen, I'll give you an example in Alabama. Alabama, when you're doing a tax deed sale, has a 6-year statute of limitations from the date of the tax sale. And so do you know how mature these tax liens are? I mean, do you need to get it to an attorney for them to file a quiet title or eject an action the next day? And have they provided you with the tax deed that's already been issued? In that case, the seller can give you just a quick claim deed of the property. Or have they not gotten a tax deed yet? And so do you need a county specific form that assigns you that tax sale certificate so then you can go get the deed issued in your name? And then another Alabama example is, have they sent notice to lien holders? So in Alabama, you've got a one year lien holder redemption. And if they have sent notice after the tax sale to that lien holder, you might be able to cut those redemption rights off earlier than you would if you just buy the portfolio and then have to send the notice yourself. So having copies of those notices, the certified mail returns and things like that, you can build all that into the portfolio, to the purchase and sale agreement with the portfolio. But you need to do that on the front end. Don't buy it and then be scrambling to try and get the documentation from the seller.
Yeah, and I think one thing I do want to say, because I know when Matt and I get to talking about this, because we joke all the time, my wife's like, you're such a nerd when it comes to this stuff. And I get that. And so we go and we talk about all the different things. And so some people, I don't want to give the impression that this is so complex that it just can't be mastered. I think what I would say is that there are a lot of variables and each state has a lot of nuance. And we can look very quickly and determine where your blind spots or issues might be, and help direct you. And so when we're talking about due diligence and things we're looking for, in our mind, we're thinking back to cases that we've had, where this went wrong, or they didn't see this, or they didn't do this. And so, it's, I guess I don't want this at all to be seen as a reason for not getting it. I think it's the exact opposite. I think, it's to just look at and to go in with, a clear plan and an understanding of exactly what you're getting into. And you can't know everything about something, especially if you haven't even been. And so what we're here to do is give you another layer of comfort in what can sometimes be a complicated process or confusing process. But at the same time, I think Matt and I, can do a pretty good job of simplifying it for you. And quite frankly, if you look at the time value of money, and this is what I always tell folks, how much is your peace of mind and how much is you trying to understand the counties and understand the statutory law and understand the judges and understand, things that Matt and I have developed over the last 20 years. And you pay us a couple hours for that. The time value of money would suggest that it's a much better deal to pay, and to engage an attorney to answer some of those questions for you.
Absolutely. It's going in, eyes wide open, I guess I like
right.
to say. And you mentioned, like you're saying, you guys have specific cases in the back of your mind as you're thinking through, here's what to avoid. And that's exactly the type of stuff that we're going to dive into as part 2 of this series. And before we kind of wrap up, I want to kind of tie this all back a little bit to Florida, mainly because it seems like a lot of people initially learn or cut their teeth in Florida, and how this is a great highlight of, well, just because you know how to do it in Florida doesn't necessarily translate to everything else. Because in Florida, if you're a lien, I'll say a lien, or you're looking to make that arbitrage spread, it's almost goes without saying, if you buy any liens on properties of any value, you don't even really have to worry about owning real estate, because at least right now, and this could vary over time, Florida is so efficient in their tax deed process that anything of value is selling at the tax deed auction. So you don't even really need to think about real estate. That is not the case in West Virginia, right? If you're thinking of buying them in West Virginia for the, and not taking into account that you might own some real estate, you're going to find yourself in a very sticky situation. Or like you said,
Right.
in Kentucky, if you're going to Kentucky and you're planning on owning real estate, you're going to find yourself beating your head against the wall on this judicial foreclosure and ending up with very little at the end of the day. Again, depending on which counties in Kentucky you approach. So I think the main thing that everybody needs to keep in mind is there's certainly not the right answer to say, I want to buy here locally because this is where I'm at. You really need to put time into thinking about what is your model, and it may vary, right? You might have multiple models, or one that's making the spread here, one you're okay with real estate there, and where talking to you guys or just an attorney, depending on the state, it can help you answer those questions of, is this a good state for my model or not? And that's I think if there's anything to take away from today, I would say keep that in mind of making sure that you have your model in mind as you assess each state. And I don't want to get into too many details, because we get into fun stuff next time with actual court cases of things that you guys have seen, and some of it, and we've talked offline, is pretty wild stuff. So I'm excited to talk to you guys more about that. But I want to thank you for your time today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Matt, for being on here first time. Randy, thanks for having you back. I look forward to talking to you guys again here in the next part. And we'll let everybody tune in next time to hear the juicy stuff.